All right. So just before we get going, a word to all of you. I would try to take advantage of as many opportunities like this as possible. When I get emails about letters of recommendation or when you're submitting things, having as much stuff on your resume, especially early on in your college career, is going to help you kind of break the tie for you and someone else who has good grades or whatever it is. So try to take advantage of these opportunities. We'll get kind of started here. My name is Professor Lantis. I will be your professor for the semester. This is Econ B251, Introduction to Economics for Business 1. So hopefully you're in the right place. So I've got the Canvas page pulled up here. The first thing I'll kind of point out is the syllabus has been up there for a week. You can always find that if you go to the syllabus tab. It's kind of sitting right there. I'll also put everything for the course up under this files tab. So the syllabus is always sitting there. I then start to kind of build these modules, which are essentially, you can think of like week by week, right? So like week 1 is module 1, week 2 is module 2, etc. I don't have all of them up there yet. Well, I do. They're just not visible to you. They live on a different Canvas page. But if you go in each folder, you can find kind of the materials for that week, right? So I'll kind of point out what all these files are as we progress throughout today's class. But you can see here, I actually posted 2 versions of this lecture, right? So I think if I hover over the one, I can click on it. So this is the skeleton version of the slides. I usually kind of write skeleton next to it. This is kind of the regular version of the slides. Usually I'll put like complete next to it, right? And so every single week, with the exception of this first week, I just kind of gave you an idea of what this is going to look like moving forward. I typically post the skeleton version of the slides at the beginning of the week. Once we've covered that week's material, after both classes, after Thursday's class, I'll post the completed version of the slides. So sometimes this has things that I kind of left out on purpose so that we could work through them together. And then kind of here, every single week, I'll end up talking about, we have weekly quizzes. But you'll see I've got practice problems for the week, and then kind of the module 1 outline is just kind of a bullet points of the topics that we're going to cover, right? So you'll see these materials every single week for every single module, the slides, the module outline, and then practice problems for the week, right? So, we're talking through a lot of stuff about how do I actually answer questions related to that material. That's what those practice problems will be. So you not only have a practice problem set. Oh, I opened the wrong one. You'll also have, we're waiting here, kind of what the answers would be, right? So you have an answer key to go along with it. So you don't just have to kind of go in blindly. I would kind of suggest working through those first without looking at the answers, kind of see which ones you got wrong. Maybe those are the types of questions you need to focus a little bit more on. Try to make sure you can go back through and solve those. And I'll mention these again here in a second. I just want to kind of point out everything's going to live on that files tab. But I then have the home page set to be kind of broken down by modules that not only include the materials for the week, but also things like quizzes. We'll talk about in-class quizzes and different materials that we'll use. So here I've got kind of the skeleton version of the slides. If you want, I've got the syllabus pulled up. I might kind of go back and forth to it. I try to summarize it, right, in the slides. So we'll kind of start working through that slide deck now, and I'll kind of answer questions along the way. So I also am a talker. So if at any point I forget to prompt you for questions, always raise your hand and make sure you feel free to ask one, especially early on in the semester. I want to make sure we have our expectations, everything kind of set out after today. Okay. So, all right. So just kind of to go through this. So the class materials that I've seen a lot of you, I guess I'll go not overwhelm you too much. Some of you have already kind of purchased this e-text, but we're going to be using an e-text through a platform called Top Hat. So really what you will need in using this is just something to access it. So if that's a laptop, a tablet, however you want to access that, we're not going to be necessarily needing to access it in class. This is going to be used for assignments that are given prior to us covering the material in class, right? Now, the textbook also has embedded questions, so there's some additional questions that you can kind of work through each week that'll kind of help you out studying the material, and also as we get closer to the exams, just additional review questions. Okay? So is it required? Yes, because I will assign assignments from this textbook, right? It's an online textbook where the questions are embedded within each module or each kind of chapter. And so we will be using this throughout the semester. I'll mention more about those assignments here in a second. When it comes to the exams, and technically I'll be using some in-class quizzes, so maybe in class it shouldn't be anything too crazy. All you should need is a basic 4-function calculator. So if you're in class, you can pull open the calculator on your phone, and it has more than what you would need to answer you'll do any of the math that we're going to be doing in class. When it comes to the exam, do you think you can use the calculator on your phone? Probably not, right? Because there's a lot of other things on your phone you could be using during the exam. So when it comes to the exam, I say a basic 4-function calculator. That's an easy one. Basically, just any calculator. I don't want you to have to go out. I mean, they're not that expensive, but I know college is expensive, so I don't want to add any more to it. If you don't have like a basic 4-function calculator you get at the dollar store, any non-graphing calculator would work. Okay, so just a very basic, as basic of a calculator as you have. That way, there won't be any kind of questions going into that exam. As we get closer to that first exam, if you have questions, will this calculator work? You can always check with me. But basically, nothing with graphing capabilities. Okay, basically because anything with graphing capabilities has the ability to store notes, things like that. So very basic, as basic of a calculator as you have is what we should be using for those exams. I put up an additional kind of link. It's just got some extra kind of review of the topics we're going to be covering. I never actually take a look at this throughout the semester, but early on I try to kind of put up some additional links that would just have additional help material. Okay. I already mentioned at the beginning of every week, you'll see those kind of skeleton slides posted. In fact, I usually will post these like for module 2, which we'll cover next week. I'll put those up after Thursday's class. Right. So I'll get those slides up the Thursday class prior to us actually going through the material. And then after we cover that material the next week, I'll post those completed versions of the slides. Okay. I also, you can see it running in the background here, record every single lecture on YouTube. Well, I record it using Kaltura, but I then post it to a YouTube playlist. So I put the link to the playlist here. It can also be found in the syllabus, right? But basically every single class, I just have Zoom running in the background. Now you notice I'm like walking away. The audio isn't going to be perfect. In fact, I wrote down already, I'm going to try to get them to give me a wearable mic. There's supposed to be one in the classroom, but I can't find it here. So the audio hopefully will be better after this first lecture, but I am going to be walking around. I'm going to be doing kind of work over here. And so it's not a perfect substitute for class, right? Additionally, I will be doing, not today, but a lot throughout the semester, we'll be switching over. There will be things that aren't in the slides that I start writing here on the dot cam, right? So every time I switch to this dot cam, it's not going to be recorded on the YouTube video, right? So that means there's value to actually being in class, because if you want the full set of notes, you're going to have to be in class. Anytime I go to this dot cam, those are things you should be writing out, right? You should be copying out everything I do on this dot cam, okay? So these recordings, as we're doing work on the dot cam, will still just be capturing this, right? So you'll have the audio of me talking through things, but if you miss class, you're not going to have any of this, and I'm not going to send notes, right? This is the value of showing up to class. These YouTube videos are meant to be, if something happens where you can't be there, it's a substitute, but it's not a perfect substitute for class, okay? Any questions before I keep moving here? And there will be 2 playlists that you'll find on YouTube. One of them is for this section. One is for the class right after you. I teach the exact same course. They'll be like over the same material, but this is the link specific to this section. Also, if you just want to search Professor Lantis on YouTube, I'm the first account that pops up, and then you can kind of find this course's playlist. Okay. In fact, probably can do that right now. Right. So if we go to YouTube here, oh, we don't want to listen to that. This is my smiling face. And then you can kind of see, here's my kind of 3 current classes I'm teaching. This is where all those videos will be posted. Okay. So I won't put links up just to not muddy up Canvas too much. Those YouTube videos are just going to live on YouTube. Okay. All right. So got that out of the way. So what do you guys actually care about, right? So how are you going to be graded in this class? Okay. So admittingly, this class is going to be heavily weighted on exams, okay? So you can see 72% of your grade comes from exams, all right? That's 3 different exams. We're going to have 2 midterms, which are in class, okay? We're then going to have the final exam. So each of these midterms is worth 22.5%. right? For a total of what? 45%, and the remaining 27% is going to come from the final. The final has a few more questions, right? So the midterm exams will typically have 25 questions in class. We have a little more time for the final, but the material is harder. So I only add an additional 5. We have that full 2-hour time block. So that's why it's weighted a little bit more, because it has more questions. Okay. Now the exams in this class are not cumulative, right? That first exam will be over the first 4 modules. The second exam will be over the next 4, and then the final will be over the final 4. Now, I say it's not cumulative. I'm not going to go back and ask you module 1, module 2 type questions on the final, but everything we do in this class builds on each other. So when we get to the end of the semester, we're still going to be talking about things like demand shifts, which is way back in module 3. I won't ask you specific questions like I did in module 3 about that, but we need to know how those work to answer more difficult questions about actual markets and how demand shifts would impact monopolies differently than perfectly competitive markets. None of this makes sense right now, but it isn't cumulative, but it is comprehensive in the sense that we're building on everything throughout the semester. Okay, so those are your exams. Every week we're going to have a Canvas quiz. So these, are going to be done on Canvas. Once you start, you'll have 60 minutes to complete them. I will always post them the Thursday after the class. So after Thursday's class this week, I'm going to put up week 1, module 1 quiz. Right? It'll be over the material that we covered this week, which the first one will be pretty easy because like half of it is going to be based off of like syllabus type review questions. And I'll mention a little bit more about this on Thursday before I kind of release this. But after Thursday's class, because I have 2 sections, you guys are a little unique. I won't release it right after class, right? But I release it after my second section is over, which is at 10:50. So they're all set to release at 11 a.m. Right, so you'll have that quiz after class on Thursday. It's then due at the end of the day on the following Monday. Right, so the Monday before we meet the next class period on Tuesday. And that's due at the end of the day, so 11:59. So if you have 60 minutes once you start to complete this quiz, if you want the full 60 minutes, when do you need to start it by? Not that difficult. If it's due at 11:59 on Monday p.m., you need to start it by. It's going to be a tough long semester if we can't do this. 10:59, right? If you want that full 60 minutes, that doesn't mean you can start before. It has to be ended and completed and turned in by 11:59, okay? Any late assignments, any late quizzes are going to count as zeros. Don't send me an email. Don't waste your time. I don't give like 10%. I know other professors, I guess, because I'm getting a lot of questions about this, like we'll give 20% reduction. If you miss an assignment or you don't turn it in on time, it's a 0. Okay, so this means you need to be really prompt, right? Or you need to be really kind of paying attention to deadlines. Okay, I kind of view this as I'm trying to get you ready for the real world, right? If you have a project that's due because someone needs to present it to a company and you turn it in 30 minutes late, well, the presentation started. I mean, they're not going to, you're going to lose your job potentially. They're not going to be like, oh, well, we'll reduce it by 50% of what your pay should have been for that hour. No, right? You might lose your job, right? So that's the same idea here. You need to have things turned in by their due date. Okay. So those are our weekly Canvas quizzes, total of 12%. We'll go a little more in depth into this in a second. Canvas discussions, I'll talk about these here in a little bit as well. These are going to be 10% of your grade. Those module questions I assigned from the e-text doesn't seem like much, but 2%. And these are going to be primarily effort-based. So this is like a way that if you're on the cutoff, getting a really high grade in this category could kind of make the difference between, I know it's really important for you guys, a B and a B+, right? Or a B+ and an A-. So I know with Kelly's highly competitive and the cutoffs they give direct admits versus pre-admits, it's really important, right? So this is a place where you can get some easy points. We'll talk about this here more in a second. And then in-class participation, which basically is attendance. I'm going to be using in-class quizzes. That's another 4%. Once again, these should be some pretty easy points as long as you're showing up and paying any ounce of attention in class, okay? So we'll go a little more in depth into each one of these categories. So I kind of already mentioned these module quizzes. They're available after class on Thursday after we cover the material. You have 60 minutes and they're due by that following Monday. So you have what, about 4 days, depending how you count it, 4.5 days to complete these. I'm not going to be in every single one of your dorm rooms or wherever you take these quizzes. So they're open notes, right? You can look at what we did throughout the class that week. These should be pretty easy to get a lot of the points on, right? Now, you're not going to be able to just, they're not like the easiest questions in the world, but you've got a lot more materials in front of you. So really take these seriously and be very prepared when you sit down to take them, Also, just because they're due at 11:59, I would not suggest starting at 10:59, and putting it off. Some people, a little bit of the feedback I get is sometimes it's beneficial to do it that Thursday, right? Or that Friday, right? When the material's still somewhat fresh, well, you've had a little bit of time to review. Now, everybody's schedule's different. Everybody kind of learns differently. If you want to take a few days to review material a little bit each day and then kind of take it on that Monday, that's fine, right? But don't forget about these, right? So whatever's, works best for you, that's what I would kind of suggest doing. I already mentioned these late quizzes will count as zeros. So throughout the semester, we'll have basically 12 modules. So there's 12 quizzes. Each week there's a quiz, right? What I will do at the end of the semester is I drop your two lowest, right? So if you miss two quizzes, which ones are going to get dropped? Well, if you miss it, it's a 0. So those would be the two that get dropped. If you do all of them, then I will drop, let's say you get, I don't know, a 6 out of 10 on one, and that was your lowest grade. That's the one I would drop. So don't just simply think of this as I can miss two quizzes and it doesn't hurt me, because it does hurt you. Because if you don't do well on a quiz and you've already missed two, well, I'm not dropping that third one, right? That 6 out of 10 isn't going to get dropped because you already had 2 zeros in there. So you need to, really, I would suggest taking all these quizzes, even if you're not super prepared. At least something is better than kind of having a 0 sitting there, because just in case you miss other ones, that, you want to make sure that your 2 lowest dropped are as high as possible, right? So at the end of the semester, I'll drop your 2 lowest. Throughout the semester, though, I'm not going to have this set in Canvas to drop. So it's kind of like Canvas is always giving you a worst case scenario. If I, continue to perform on the quizzes like I am, this is what my grade would be. So at the end of the semester, everyone's quiz grade should go up a little bit because I'm dropping your 2 lowest. Unless you get perfect like on all of them, I guess your grade wouldn't change, but that's really the only scenario where that would happen. Okay. So what that works out to be is each quiz is worth 12 points for a total of 120 points, or 12% of your overall grade. So the total points in the course you can think of is like 1,000. I just made it that easy so it kind of lines up with the percentages. So each quiz being worth what? 1.2%, right? Any questions over this before I keep moving here? Okay. Once again, I'll kind of put up a link. So in fact, we haven't covered the material, so I'm not going to release it until after Thursday, but I've already got the first quiz sitting there ready to go, right? So after Thursday's class at 11 a.m., this will show up under module 1. It'll also show up under this quizzes tab, right? So once it's published, you'll be able to see it here. But, the homepage will always kind of have the quiz. I'll put it in that module as well, so it's kind of easier. It's, easy to find as well that way. Okay. The next category we'll talk about is these Canvas discussions. So 5 times throughout the semester, and usually it's about every 2 weeks. Around exam weeks, there gets an added week in there. That's, the third week because we're just doing the exam that week. But about every 2 to 3 weeks, we'll have these Canvas discussions where it's basically just, how many of you done discussion boards in like high school or in college courses? A lot of people, right? So in a section this big, we have these Canvas discussions kind of generate some like work with your peers kind of idea. These are going to be worth like 10% of your overall grade. There's 5 of them. Each one's worth 2%. So, these should be pretty easy. I realize we live in a world of AI. And so, I would suggest what's going to get you the most out of these discussions is not to use AI, but I'm not an idiot and I can't police it completely. Although in the grading, right, when I'm going through these, if I see anything that looks obvious that you weren't actually, I actually will type things into AI myself and look to see if I'm getting the exact same output as what you would if you typed in the question that I'm giving you. Generally, it's going to be something where I give you a pretty lengthy couple paragraphs that's discussing a topic. I also then give you some data sources. Okay, so these Canvas discussions are meant to think about a topic that we've covered, but relate it to data. So 5 points will be your initial response to whatever my first prompt is. So the different paragraphs that I give you, they might have some hypothetical, some potential questions you could think about answering or kind of responding to. And then also have the data sets. 5 points will come from simply responding to that with your own initial post. Another 5 points will come from connecting your initial post and mentioning something about what you found in that data set. Okay, so that's a total of 10 points. If there are a total of 20, the other 10 points comes from responding to 2 other students' posts. So you respond to 2 other students' posts. Each of those responses are worth 5 points. That means every single assignment is going to be 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5, or 20 points. So when I go through the grading, I'm really just going through making sure that it's a kind of well thought out, not just nonsense response. So the grading is it's not super stringent. So what these are meant to be for you is to get used to actually accessing databases to find some of this data that you have to connect to your, initial post. But then also kind of thinking about how would I, if I have a differing viewpoint from someone else on this topic, how would I kind of defend my position? Or how can I, maybe recognize that they thought of something that I didn't when you're responding to the other students' posts. Now I'll go more in depth into this after that first assignment is posted. So that'll be a couple weeks from now. So about 2 weeks from now, I'll get that first one posted. Generally, there's about a week to a week and a half that these are open. So you have a pretty good amount of time to kind of get your initial post, and then respond to other students. But these are really what I view as like everything in life, your job, and also this course is a combination of 2 things, effort and ability, right? I can have all the ability in the world, and if I don't practice at all, I'm not going to end up in, I don't know, an IU's football team, right? You actually have to put in some effort. So your grade is the same way. There's a lot of things like the exams that are going to be a lot more ability-based, right? How well can you understand the material? That's what kind of comes out in the exams. Now, obviously, your effort you put in, a lot of students get mad because it's not always reflected in your exam score. Right? I can study forever. Like I could study forever in chemistry, and I still wouldn't get good grades on chemistry exams. Right? That's just not my forte. Right? But where your effort is kind of exactly matched with the points that you get is here. Because as long as you're putting some time in and actually getting these assignments completed on time, you're going to get all the points. Right? So this is an effort-based category where even though the effort you put in doesn't always translate to a higher exam score, like hopefully it does to a degree, right? But it's a combination of your effort and ability. This category is primarily effort-based. So this is a good way to kind of help increase your grade if you don't do as well on one of those exams. Okay? And 10% is a decent amount of your overall grade, right? So I would take these seriously. Make sure you're not missing these, because a 0 here, what is that going to do to your score in this category? Bring it down a lot. All right. So stay on top of these and make sure you're really getting these submitted prior to those due dates, which once I assign them, we're going to see, I always going to keep the due dates as Friday at the end of the day. And I'll mention these when they're open. Like I said, they're going to be open for more than a week. So I'll kind of have multiple classes where I make sure I'm like reiterating, hey, if you haven't done it yet, make sure you're getting on and getting this Canvas discussion done. Okay. Any questions on that before we keep moving? Any questions on anything I've set up to this point? Good. Okay. I'll kind of also assign these module readings. So this is where that e-text, not only is it a good source because it coincides with how we're covering material week to week, but it also has embedded questions. And we started to, Professor Graff wrote this book, and I've been working with him and some professors to like add more questions in, and adding tools all the time. So there's more graphing tools than there used to be. So it's also a really good practice of like how we work with graphs. So the majority of the semester, we're going to be drawing a lot of graphs. Like that's a lot of what I'm going to be doing on the DocCam. And so this is a tool that kind of gives you some additional resources and ability to kind of work with graphs as well. So similar to the quizzes, I'll always post these after Thursday's class. So next week, we're going to cover module 2. Although the quizzes are to go over the material we covered the prior week, the module readings, I want you to do those before we cover the material. So I'm not expecting that you go into these module readings and are experts at those topics yet. It's more of a way for me to kind of prime your brain for the next topic that we're going to cover. So the very first module reading that is going to be worth points is going to be module 2, right? Which is what we'll cover next week. So after Thursday's class, I'll post up module 2. It'll be due the following Monday before we start covering module 2 in class next Tuesday. Okay? So just like the quizzes, you have about 4.5 days, depending on how you count it, to get these module readings done. And they're always going to be like one chapter in advance. Right? So the questions that are embedded in each module, those are the questions that you're going to be answering for these assignments. They're meant to be, as long as you're even probably just like skimming through the chapter, right? And what I expect most of you will do, and it's not the worst thing in the world, I'm just once again trying to prime your brain as the goal of these assignments, is you'll probably look at the first question instead of reading everything that comes before it, read the question and try to find what paragraph talks about that. That's fine, right? You know, you have to get the question correct to earn the points, so you don't have to like read every single word of the text, right? But I am wanting you to at least be able to link up those questions, find where the answer is in the text, and be able to kind of answer them accordingly, right? Now, what I realize is even if you do that, you're new at this. We haven't covered the material yet. So most of these are multiple choice questions. Some of them are like numerical response, but you're going to get 3 guesses, or basically you have 3 attempts at every single question, right? So if you, and it lets you know which questions you get right or wrong once you hit submit. So you can go back through, and if it was a multiple choice question with 4 answers, I mean, if you're putting a decent, you know, any amount of like effort, like actually try and answer question, you know, you guess 3 out of the 4, it's likely you're going to be able to get a lot of these points. Now, are you going to get perfects on all of them? Probably not, right? But you can get the majority of these points as long as you're putting in a good faith effort into answering those questions, especially in the fact that you have 3 attempts at every single question. Okay. And there's no penalty for getting the first attempt wrong, right? As long as you get the answer correct from one of those, you'll get the points. So it's going to be a little bit different. We won't have one for module 1 because that would have meant I had to assign it last week, which we weren't, of course, didn't start yet. But we'll start with module 2, go all the way to module 13. At one point in the semester after the first midterm, I combine modules 5 and 6. So really there won't be a module 5 reading. It's just going to be the module 6 reading we use. So it's going to be a total of 11 of these module readings, right? So 1 less than the quizzes. So instead of dropping your lowest 2, I just kind of drop your lowest module reading at the end of the semester. So once again, if you miss one, if you miss a due date, and that's a 0, it'll still show up in a 0 on Canvas. It'll give you kind of the worst case scenario if you like missed another one. But at the end of the semester, I will drop your lowest module reading, right? But once again, I would try to get on, take these seriously, get as many points possible here. So that way I'm not dropping a missed 0. I'm dropping whatever your actual lowest score was, okay? I also want to mention something that might pop up in the weekly quiz for this week. So I said that the quizzes are due at the end of the day on Monday. I think I also misspoke a little bit and said that the module readings are also due at the end of the day on Monday. They are, but you'll notice I don't have 11:59 p.m. here. I have 11:50. So with a class this big, when it syncs the grades up, I need a little bit of a buffer. Otherwise, it takes so long that it uploads everybody's scores as late. So instead of 11:59, those module readings are set to be due at 11:50. Right? It's still end of the day. I hope you're not up till midnight and working on these. Hopefully you do them well in advance of that due date. But there is a little bit of a difference here with the module readings where they're due at 11:50 instead of 11:59. Just giving kind of Top Hat and Canvas a little bit of buffer time to upload those scores. Okay. All right. Any questions on that before we keep moving here? Okay. So I think we just have one more category to go through, but I have this slide and it should be relatively kind of straightforward. If you're having any issues with it, feel free to reach out to me. But if you go to tophat.com, and this is in the syllabus, right? And it's also up here in the first week of slides, but you'll basically register. Now, what I would suggest doing is when you register, and if you've already registered prior to today's class, it's not the biggest deal in the world. And I think there's a way to change it. So if you need help with that, feel free to reach out. But use your IU email address. That just makes linking it up to Canvas a lot more seamless and doesn't present us with any technical issues. So use your IU email address. I think you'll create your own password. Doesn't have to be the same as your IU password, although that might make it a little bit easier to remember it, right? So using your IU credentials is probably the easiest way to kind of get registered here. Once you have your username and password, our course's code is 302218. You'll then kind of enroll in that course. It then gives you access to the e-text. You know, you're going to have to put in some payment information there as well. I forget the exact cost now. They change it a little bit semester to semester. But once you pay for it, you'll be able to kind of access all of our course materials on Top Hat. If you're having any issues, here's a link that just has some general help guidelines. If this doesn't help you, there's probably a customer support that you can reach out to, or feel free to reach out to me if it's something after looking at this link, you still can't figure out something's not working. I can kind of get you in contact with the right people if I'm not able to help you, or I can help you myself. Okay. So this is our course's kind of join code for Top Hat. This will be, you need to make sure I would try to get this done today, because after Thursday's class, I'm going to post the module 2 reading, which will be due on Monday of next week. So you're already going to have that first assignment posted this week. So I'd make sure you are able to kind of get on, logged on, get your account created here. Okay. Any questions on, once again, this syllabus is also available on its, there's a link on Canvas. So if you forget this, you can always go back to the slides and kind of look at that join code, etc. Okay. Any questions on this before we keep moving? Okay. And I know if some of you are still like messing around with your schedules a little bit, I believe there's like a 7-day trial thing you, instead of paying for it right away, you can sign up for. If you're still like, oh, I don't know, drop this class or move into something, depending on your schedule. I think there's that option there as well. Okay. So, and just to kind of show you what it looks like. So I'm actually going to post to Canvas. So this one is not for points, right? But there is a module 1 chapter in the book, right? So here I've got it published now, should be under the home page. It's set to be 0 points. If I now click on the link, blocking my pop-up. So log on my school account, hopefully it automatically, usually once it's linked to Canvas, and we'll make you like sign in if you access the link through Canvas, because it already has it linked up. So that's why I didn't have to do any signing in here. So you can see all the modules are here. I don't have them set to be released to you. So all I have set released right now is that table of contents. And if you want to, you can start to look through module 1. So usually it kind of has, the different topics that it will talk about. Here's kind of the first question. This first module, it's easy. If I was using this for points, this is just an opinion-based question. There's no right or wrong answer. But if we scroll down here, yeah, so like it talks about micro versus macroeconomics. This Affordable Care Act was an example of which one. You would kind of type your answer in here. Let's see, I think there's probably one, even in this first chapter. Here's a multiple choice question, right? Now, sometimes pay attention. There's multiple choice. There's also select all that apply, right? So if you have a select all that apply, this goes the same for the module quizzes that we're doing on Canvas. I will usually highlight it on Canvas and bold it to make sure that like it's obvious that it's select all that apply question. But if you have a select all, it's not just one answer, there could be multiple answers, okay? So this is kind of what those module readings look like. The questions are embedded in the text. You can't just go, group all the questions together. You actually have to kind of scroll through, find each question, make sure you're answering it. Then by the time, we'll move Zoom's thing out of the way. You get all the way down here. Where's it at? The last question. You kind of answer that last question. And then I don't think mine will have this because I'm on an instructor account, but it'll have like a submit button down in I believe it's the bottom right corner. Once you've answered every single question, you can then submit that. See which ones you got right, which ones you got wrong. You can then make your second attempt, see which ones you got right or wrong. Now, hopefully in the first attempt, if you got it right, keep going with that answer, right? And then on the second attempt, if there is any that you got wrong, you can then change your answer, submit it again, and you get 3 of those attempts on each assignment. So this one is not for any points. This is just to give you an example. Once you sign in, you have the first chapter, and you can start to kind of see what answering these questions would look like, okay? And then after Thursday's class, I'll release this module 2 reading, okay? Questions on this before we keep moving? Once again, if you have issues getting signed on, check that kind of help link first, but then also feel free to reach out to me, okay? All right, so we'll go back to Canvas here, go to the home page, and we'll kind of pick up where we left off. All right, so when I say reach out to me, when I talk about the Top Hat, that does mean reach out to me. But for everything kind of moving forward after this initial kind of getting logged on to Top Hat, if you have questions, I have 2 TAs essentially for this course. So Here's their name. They're both in the syllabus as well. I think on the very top of the syllabus, I have their email address. In the syllabus, I also have their office hours. So in addition to my office hours, they're going to have office hours every week as well. So if your schedule doesn't allow you to get to my office hours, which are what? Monday and Wednesday, 9:30, 12:30, so kind of earlier in the day, they also have some office hours that they'll be available each week as well. This TA is full transparency on the job market, so they might be doing some traveling. So their office hours, some weeks, and I'll make sure I post announcements on Canvas, might have to be just virtual. And so there's kind of a virtual Zoom link that if they have to be missing 1 week, they'll still do office hours via Zoom. I do a very similar thing. I know that this is a big campus, right? It's difficult sometimes going all the way from wherever you live to get to my office. What I'll do every single office hours is I show up in person, right? In fact, I kind of prefer that. It's easier. But if you can't make it in person, in fact, if you're feeling a little bit under the weather, I'd appreciate if instead of coming in person, you go down via Zoom, because I'm trying to avoid sickness this winter, as well as I hope all of you are. But I'll always kind of start Zoom in my office at 9:30, and then I'll just kind of keep an eye. I have it kind of sitting in the corner, and if someone joins, I can meet with you virtually during those office hours as well. So this virtual office hour link for me will always be available. So I've got it in the slides. It's also here in the syllabus. You can always kind of log on during my office hours and meet with me virtually as well. Is that clear enough? So you can show up in person, or you can use this link during those scheduled office hours. The same will be true for this TA, right? But in terms of communication, if you have questions, right, about course material, right, or I don't know, due dates, things like that, they'll be aware of all of that. So for most questions, unless it's like something extremely personal or something that, you're going to have to be missing, I don't know, you end up in a hospital and, for a week or two and you need to reach out to me directly, that's fine. But for 95% of questions, first email kind of the TA. If they can't answer the question, they then forward it to me. That just helps me kind of not have as many emails to kind of get back to. It helps you get an answer quicker because they're likely going to be able to respond to you a little bit quicker than I will be able to. Between all of my courses and the other things that I do outside of teaching. And if your last name is A through K, this is the TA that you'll reach out to. If it's L through Z, this is the TA you'll reach out to first. Once again, if they don't know how to answer your question, they'll basically just forward it to me anyways. Okay. So that just kind of helps things move a little more seamless, helps you get answers back a little bit quicker. Okay. Any questions on that idea? And then I put the YouTube playlist again, just another place where you have that link. This is also a good thing to go back if I have a question. Maybe I should check what Professor Landis said in class first, right? Or if I know that he said it in class, but I forgot to write it down, you can always go back to those YouTube videos and kind of, see what I said about that topic or, about that assignment or due date. Okay. So that kind of outlines the different categories of which will be graded in. And now I'm just kind of going to go through more like course expectation stuff throughout the semester. So any questions before I do that? Okay. We're also going to have some additional things that will help you. I skipped something. Hold on. I got excited. We talked about registering for Top Hat. I forgot to talk about the in-class quizzes. Okay. So someone should have called me out. I mentioned them earlier and I forgot to go through them. So we're basically, if we exclude exams and every week we have an in-class exam, I do a review session. We're going to have 24 classes in which we don't have an exam or review session. So there's going to be 24 class periods in which I expect you to be in class. So each of those 24 class periods, I'm going to be using an in-class quiz. This first week, I'm not going to use any because people are adding and dropping classes, right? So we're going to start with these in-class quizzes next Tuesday. So a week from today, you will have the first in-class quiz, okay? I'll show you what they look like here in just a second. But of those 24 class periods, right, they're going to account for 4% of your overall grade. So simply answering the questions in class will get you half the points. Getting them correct gets you the other half, okay? Now, if you're in class and paying attention, I sometimes will do things with my face or like point that makes the answer pretty clear what it is. If you're not paying attention, you still might get it wrong, right? But as long as you're putting a good faith effort in, you're going to be able to get the majority of these points. No, am I going to do that every single question? No. Sometimes I'm going to want you to work through them on your own. You could talk to the people around you. These aren't meant to be like, they're not meant to be like exam type questions. So I usually like to give you 5 minutes to work on these questions. I like to hear discussion between people. What did you do here? Because that's helping you learn, right? You can always learn from others, right? That's one thing. Like if you don't know a lot of people in this class, or maybe you know some people across sections, try to meet new people in this class, work together outside of class on things, because you might understand something that someone else doesn't and vice versa. Okay. So these will be kind of due or set to be due in class. At the end of the semester, I'll drop your lowest 4. So what I view this as is I expect you to be in every class. There are points tied to that, right? So there's 24 class periods in which you have to be in class to take these in-class quizzes. I guess technically you don't. I will post these in-class quizzes to Canvas, right? So that's how you will access them. So when you're in class, you will need a computer, a tablet, or a phone to be able to access these quizzes on Canvas during class. The way that I can make sure you're not just sitting in your dorm room doing this is every single in-class quiz, I give you a code to get into it, right? So if you're not in class, I guess if you just sit there and guess numbers over and over, maybe you get in. But I usually add decimals to this, so the probability you can get the right number is basically 0. If you're just guessing. So you need to be in class to get that code to then be able to access that in-class quiz. At the end of the semester, I'll drop your 4 lowest. This is what I kind of view as sick days, right? So if you have like a general sickness, like that keeps you out of class, or you have something, a commitment that you have for a club that you want to go, I don't know, something else that you want to do other than being in class, you get 4 of those days to miss, right? Now, if you have like extenuating circumstances or a university approved absence, I'll need documentation to be able to excuse any absences, right? For like just general sicknesses where it's going to keep you out for like 1 class, that's what those 4 days are kind of built in there for, right? So at the end of the semester, I'll drop kind of your lowest 4 days. You can kind of think about those as additional sick days. I know there's differences in classes. I don't know why people get my section confused with others. Like you're here, you're listening to me talk, but there's no like extra credit if you attend all 24, right? It's just that I'm going to take your best 20 of those 24. And if you're missing some, right, and there's zeros, those are going to be the lowest 4 that get dropped. Okay. Now it might not seem like much, but 4% of your overall grade, like I said, there is a little bit of ability in here that you have to get the questions right. But a lot of those questions, I'm going to give you some strong hints, or we'll walk through them together. So as long as you're paying attention to what I'm doing, you should be able to get the right answer. So this is another category with a lot of effort-based points. So those module readings, the in-class quizzes, and those Canvas discussions, it's really just a lot of effort, right? That's going to help increase your grade if you don't do as well on one of or a couple of the exams, right? So really take these seriously. Try to make sure you're in class. I know it's early. 8 a.m.s aren't my favorite either. But, right, this is an easy way if you're on the cutoff, right? Getting a good score in this category kind of can bump you up from that B to B plus or whatever that cutoff, score would be. Once again, I kind of view those 4 lowest class periods as kind of sick days. So what will these look like? So generally, I'll have kind of the date, like usually I would call this, module. So next week on Tuesday, it'll be module 2, class 1 in-class quiz, right? So kind of each day I will have an in-class quiz every Tuesday and Thursday. This week's a little bit different, but I wanted to kind of give you an idea of what they're going to look like, right? So here I've now got this published. So these won't be published prior to class. I'll usually publish them in class when I want to use them. Sometimes this will be in the middle of lecture, sometimes towards the end, sometimes very early. So it's always going to be kind of a random point in class. So if I use these early and you're late, that's not good. So it's not only making sure you're here, making sure you're here on time when we start class. Okay. So you would then kind of see this pop up. It'll be under the quizzes tab, but it'll also be under whatever module we're currently in. So this is what they'll kind of look like. This is just a test quiz set for 0 points. It's just a way for me to kind of show you what they'll look like. Let's see if I can remember, save this. So anyone want to kind of humor me, if you click on this, it probably asks you for a code, right? Yeah, so try 16. I think that's what I have it set to be. If I'm wrong, I know what the other number would be. That worked. Why did I choose 16? Hopefully after next Monday, 16-0, right, for the football team. And, follow football. Everyone's talking about all Christmas. All my family wants to say is, I bet everybody's excited down there. Yeah. Where everyone's clearly excited. So once you get in there, I think I've got some sample questions you can answer. Obviously, this is not worth any points. It's just a way for me to kind of use it in class. You can see how you would access it. I'll give you a number. Usually it's not going to be something like 16. It's going to be something like 32.15, right? Or just some random number, okay? But that's kind of what that will look like. I'll publish them. You can access them right away when I publish them in class. They'll show up under whatever module we're currently in. And then I usually will have the due time. I think for this one is set to just to be the end of class. Usually what I'll do is I know where I want to use them. And so before I publish them in class, I'll go and set the due date and time to be 5 or 10 minutes after we start, right? So there won't be open for super long. It's just going to be 5 to 10 minutes over when I want you to work on them in class. And then I'll be like, okay, the quiz is due in the next minute. Make sure you're getting on now, getting it submitted. I'll kind of give you that prompt so we make sure everyone's getting it submitted on time. And then we'll kind of move on, go back to lecture. Okay. Is this any questions on what this would look like? Okay. All right. So now I've covered everything that's the syllabus. We'll set a little bit more class expectation stuff. So we talked about how you'll communicate and emailing those TAs first. The next thing is some additional help sources. Every week, with the exception of this first week, so these won't start until next week, okay? We're going to have these collaborative learning sessions, right? So they start next week on Thursday, and they're going to be every Thursday and Monday. So after next Thursday, we will have covered Module 2 material. So Thursdays, what I call CL sessions, or these collaborative learning sessions, are going to be Thursday of next week after we cover Module 2, and then that Monday before we start covering Module 3 the next week. Right? It'll always be kind of the same way, right? Every single week. We'll go through the practice problems that I put up on Canvas. They're going to review those practice problems with you. But what I'm giving them is I'm giving them written out solutions. So you can see what the answers are, but once again, I could look at a chemistry question, look at the answer, and I'd be like, I don't know how the hell they got this, right? And so going to these collaborative learning sessions, they actually have a solutions file that they'll work through every single one of those questions for you, right? So it's a way to see how would I actually solve and get the correct answer, which is ultimately what you're going to need to do on the quizzes and the exam. So these are really, really valuable. If I look at a correlation between CL attendance and performance in this course, it's positively correlated, right? Now there might be some selection bias. That's a statistics issue that we aren't really going to talk about, but there's a strong positive correlation there. I think a lot of students find these really helpful, right? Not only to help improve their quiz performance, but also their exam performance as well. Now, once again, these won't start until next Thursday, right? So they'll start with Module 2 material. But then kind of every single Thursday and Monday, they will be available. So I think I have here, I don't know, I actually just got the locations yesterday, so I will update this slide. And I'll actually have some more things next week to kind of outline and show you and summarize where these are at. But these are going to be the 6 time slots. So 3 on Thursday, 3 on Monday. And then at each time slot, there's 3 locations available. So, depending on where you're at, different locations might work better. It also helps break them up so they're a little bit smaller. I've got 300 of you. I don't expect my collaborative learning session leaders to do a class of 300. So we're kind of breaking it up, trying to make sure there's 3 locations at every single one of these time slots. And I'll make this information available to you on Canvas, and I'll kind of show you where that's at in Thursday's class. Once again, I just got those in last night where those locations will be at, so I wasn't able to kind of update these, okay? And then there's some additional tutoring sessions. So let's see. I'm going to click on this link because I will get them wrong if I try to do it from the top of my head. And now have I freaked out this computer? Let's see. Give it a second to respond here. I probably should exit out before I click the link. There we go. So if you click on that link, here's why I went crazy. So that's Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday nights. So these are not collaborative learning sessions. These are not specific to me or this course. These are just help sessions. No matter what economics course you're in, you can go here and ask questions. So a lot of the questions, like just because we have so many B251 and B252 students, they'll expect a lot more students to be coming from those courses. So they'll be pretty familiar with how to answer those questions. But it's not specific like just to this course or this section. It's just like free open tutoring. So 6 to 9 on Tuesday, 7 to 9 Wednesday, 6 to 8 on Thursday, all in Wiley Hall, which is where my office is at. So if you go back to the syllabus, the very top, my office is over in Wiley Hall, which is right up the hill this way, right? I'm on the 3rd floor, 309. These help sessions are in 329. So I'm over on the right. They're like the first room you go into right off the elevator, okay? So just additional help sources that I want you to know are available. So CL sessions are specific to this course. These additional tutoring, just another time, kind of location, you can go and ask general questions. Questions on this before we keep moving? Yeah.
So for the extra credit points, how much would that be in total for the whole grade?
Yeah. So every single week, you can get extra credit points from attending not the help sessions, but just the collaborative learning sessions, right? I'm trying to motivate you to go to these because I know they're very helpful. So every week you attend, you get 0.15 points of extra credit. Doesn't seem like much, right? I'll kind of go into this in a second. So if you go on Thursday and Monday of module 2, you're only going to get extra credit once for that module, right? So you can only get extra credit for attending one of these sessions each week, right? Now, we have 12 weeks throughout the semester, right? Multiply kind of that by 1.5 points or 0.15%, right? That's going to be a total of what? Right? It's going to be 1.8% of extra credit that could get added to your grade, or 18 points. That might not seem like much, but that's getting pretty close to 2% was our module readings. Also 1.8%. Once again, if you're on the cutoff, I hate when people reach out at the end of the semester and they're like, I really need a B+. And I look at their collaborative learning, I'm like, if you would have just attended a couple of these, it would have bumped you up past that next, like into that next grade category. So this is a way like that, I'm trying to give you additional opportunities so that when it comes to the end of the semester, if you end up close to a cutoff, if you've been attending these CL sessions, this is extra points that just get added into your final grade, right? So if it's 1.8% at the end of the semester, I could have a, 89.5. When I add that in, I now get bumped to above a 90. I've now got an A- instead of a B+, right? So it's a small amount of extra credit, but if you attend them weekly, make it part of your routine, your weekly schedule, this is a pretty good amount of like free points. You don't have to get anything right. You just have to be there. And I'll talk a little more about this next week. But every session you go into, I'll tell my leaders, like they basically just pass around an attendance sheet. You sign in. They do that at the beginning and at the end to make sure you can't just sign in and leave. Okay, so you need to sign at the beginning and you sign at the end. I then will kind of have these all logged in a shared file, and then I upload those points to Canvas like periodically throughout the semester so that we can kind of make sure you're getting your attendance recorded. So I'll kind of upload the attendance every single week to kind of have a running total so you make sure that you were recorded. And if there's any questions, we can kind of get those worked out as soon as possible. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you just have to attend one day, one location, and that's all. You can't, if you attend multiple, you can. You're just only going to get extra credit once for that week. Yeah. Any other questions on this? Once again, I'll go through the procedure a little bit more next week because they do start next week. And I'm actually going to, just to kind of help me get things sorted out, I'm going to post this. Try not to answer this right now, right this second. All right, please don't. I'm going to show you what this looks like. So I've got this available, I believe, till the end of the day this Sunday, right? So I have this open this week. It's going to ask you for your most preferred, second, third most, and how often you plan to attend. So I want you to get on, think about your schedule this week, look at those available times. And I will try to get the locations updated today as well, if that makes a difference in terms of what time you would prefer. So I'll try to get those updated before we meet in class on Thursday. But think about which ones you'd be the most likely to attend. Kind of give me those preferences. I'll then kind of sort you. This is just my way, and I'll put up a list. You can attend any week. You can change the time, you can change the location, you can change the day you go on. This is a way that I'm going to build a list that just guarantees you a seat, right? So some of these rooms are like 30-person rooms. If everybody shows up and there's 40 students, there's going to be 10 people standing up. It's just a way for me to kind of make sure like that I'm not having certain days and times that are going to be overflowing. And if there are, then I might need to put an additional room request. So try to be as, like I said, think about your schedule before you answer this quiz. It's due at the end of this week on Sunday. It's not for any points, but it helps me kind of get you sorted just to make sure that no room is like overcrowded. These collaborative learning sessions are meant to be beneficial to you. They're more beneficial because instead of a room of 300, there's like rooms of 20 or 30 people, and you can get your answers, questions answered a little bit quicker as you could. It's not a little bit different than kind of class. Okay. So try to get this done. If you don't respond to this quiz by the end of the day Sunday, well, I'm just going to put you in wherever there's available seats, right? Or in terms of thinking about what the kind of frequency look like. Now, once again, week to week, just because I'm putting you in a specific, you can change the day, time, location you go to each week. You can still award that extra credit. Okay? Just a way for me to make sure no one place is getting over trafficked. Okay. All right. So that'll be sitting there. It's under the quizzes tab, but it'll also be sitting under that module 1 as well, just kind of this collaborative learning poll. And then we've talked about collaborative learning sessions. So let's talk about a few more things here, and we'll try to get you out of here a little early. So we're going to be talking about things throughout the semester like that become a little bit political. I am not trying to give you any political, I'm not making any political statements in this class. We're purely trying to understand the economic implications of different political decisions, right? So we might talk about things like taxes. How is that going to impact prices that we see of goods on the market? I'm not telling you whether or not this tax is a good or a bad thing, right? We might talk about, why do people litter or pollute, right? We can kind of break down the decision that leads to whether or not I decide to, why some people do, why some people don't. I'm not saying whether or not it's good or bad to litter. I might have an opinion based, I might hold an opinion about that, but that's not what I'm going to be telling you in class. We're just trying to understand why those decisions are made. Even, this is a little more B252. We won't really go into this too much, but like communism versus capitalism, they're just different economic structures. I'm not trying to say which one is better or worse, but we can understand the implications that each one of them would have on a country if they chose one of them versus the other. Okay. So I'm not, trying to make any political statements throughout the year, but we will look at the resulting outcomes on markets or individual decision-making of different political decisions or policies that are made, right? So in a lot of the situations, even we'll see some of the answers to some of the topics we'll look at. Is a lot of times, does it cause things to go up, down, is it good or bad? A lot of the times in economics, the answer is, it depends. A lot of the time, we actually can't determine the answer, right? And so especially when it comes to this political stuff, a lot of the times, is this policy good or bad? Depends. Depends on what we value, what we don't value, right? So when it comes to like the Canvas discussions, or we're talking about things in class, try to be civil. Try not to tear somebody's post on the Canvas discussions. Try not to be mean or derogatory. A lot of economics is really there's all these different choices we can make. No one is necessarily right or wrong. It depends on what we're trying to accomplish. And different people are going to try to accomplish different things. And so the decision might actually vary person to person. Okay. I put up a summary of the important dates here. So I'm getting to you ahead of time what the in-class midterm exam dates will be. So mark these down in your calendars. You would need to be in class February the 12th and March the 26th. That's when we're taking these 2 midterms in class. And then I already have the final exam date. We really got unlucky. We're in 8 a.m. and our during finals week is at 8 a.m. as well. I don't choose these. In fact, really don't want to have to say 8 a.m. But that's the time slot we're given everybody's schedules. That's what accommodates it.
So even though we meet on Tuesday, Thursday,
Yep, final exam days and times are set a little bit different. Yep, so that final exam is on Wednesday at May 10th. And I'll make sure I reiterate this when we get closer to that final exam date, but this is what the university has assigned our course. Okay. So how do you succeed in this class? You know, kind of mentioned, first of all, there's points associated with it, but read those, go through those model reading questions, take them seriously, try to get as many points as possible in that category. You get 3 attempts, right? Make sure you're getting submitted on time. Show up to class on time. Be ready to answer those in-person quizzes. So there's only going to be collaborative learning sessions. There won't be collaborative learning sessions after the exam. They'll just be covering whatever module we covered that week. Yep. Okay. Any other questions for keep moving here? Okay. You know, practice with those weekly exam practice problems. I'm giving you them for a reason. They're going to look very similar to your quiz questions. The collaborative learning sessions that go through those practice questions, I'm giving the written out solutions those for a reason. They're going to look very similar to the types of quiz questions you see that week. Okay. Take those quizzes seriously, right? Don't miss them. You don't want those zeros in there. When I drop your lowest quiz scores in, I don't want to be dropping zeros. I want to be dropping 6 out of 10s, 5s, whatever it is. I don't want to be dropping kind of missing quizzes. So make sure you're taking all those. So you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Here's another summary of my office hours, the location, the link to those virtual office hours, the TA's emails. You can find their office hours and locations in that syllabus, right? Help me help you, okay? This is becoming an older movie. I'll try to throw in things like this to keep things a little bit exciting throughout the semester. We'll kind of start with material here, but I have a little bit more to get through. So we're going to skip down here. We'll start with that on Thursday. So just a couple things to kind of leave you with, right? Get this out of the way. So this is, I take every opportunity to show my son off. So he's 14 months this week, right? We're going to be racing through the semester. I get it's going to be a lot at first. I gave you a lot of information today, right? Today was primarily a review of the syllabus. That'll be like the first half of that first weekly module quiz, right? So review what we covered today. Make sure that you know kind of what the course expectations are moving forward, because things are going to move quickly. We're jumping right into material on Thursday, okay? A lot of things in this class, right, before we kind of get all excited, right, are going to be very different from what you've looked at before. There's not always a right answer. I've kind of already mentioned this, right? And so things are going to be a lot different. You might not have, even if you've taken an econ course in high school, I get people all the time saying, I did well in my econ course in high school. I'm struggling here. We're increasing it up a notch, right? The difficulty is going to be quite a bit. And so things are going to be a lot different, okay? It's okay not to understand things at first, right? I get this look from my son a lot of bewilderment. I can't stress enough. I like teaching, right? I like doing this lecture. If you are struggling with things and have questions, I know I have TAs. I know I have these collaborative learning sessions. They're all good materials. I love meeting with students during office hours, right? So do not view me as like, I don't know, hopefully I'm pretty inviting, right? But like, don't be hesitant even early in the semester, even if you think your questions are dumb. There's no dumb questions, right? This is all new to you, right? Come to my office. Feel free to stop by anytime. And if my office hours don't work for you, send me an email. A lot of times I can schedule 15, 30 minutes to meet with you at some other point during the week as well. I'm in my office most days from like 7:30 to 4:30. Okay. So if my office hours don't work for you one week, don't hesitate to reach out and try to find a time to schedule with me. Okay. Also, courses are important, but also you're still in college. Try to make sure you take some time to relax, unwind. Don't get like too built up. Like it's taking a step away from step away from things often kind of helps once you go back to actually being able to understand it a little bit better. And also sort of have fun this semester. We're going through a lot of serious topics, but at the same time, we can kind of, hopefully I'll give you examples how you can apply economics, not just to like markets and goods, but like your general lives. Okay. So that's all I have for you today. I will see you guys on Thursday. Try to get on, take that poll. Also, that first test quiz just to see what those in-class quizzes will look like.